Hi, Randy Johnson here from StandUpPaddleAndSail.com, and I'm here with Matt Hudgens from Central Coast Paddleboard and Kayak. Matt was a great opportunity for me to meet, I believe, up in Cambria. I saw you scoping out a surf site.
Yeah, that's right. I recall that a few years ago.
Yeah, saw your van and thought, wow, I need to do this. I'd had a closed mind to stand-up paddleboarding for too many years, and Matt was gracious enough to introduce it to me and gave me a tremendous background on paddle technique. And I think, Matt, what brought you to Morro Bay area?
Oh, well, originally I got here looking for a spot on the coast. Lived in the rivers and a quiet little town on the coast to raise a family.
So
actually,
you were on the river. Where were you on the river?
We were living up in Coloma area, up on the South Fork of the American.
Okay. And that's your background, is whitewater?
That's correct, yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Easy.
So, you were in whitewater kayaking before stand-up paddleboarding?
Correct, yeah. Well, quite a few of us came from the whitewater side of things and the stand-up.
And what's your background there?
Well, I started it as something to do when I moved inland. I couldn't sail anymore and quickly fell in love with it, and spent the next 20 years guiding, teaching, and paddling every opportunity I could out of kayak. So.
And did you do some competition?
Did some competitions. It was more of that was the fun side of it for me. It wasn't something I was super serious about. I was more serious about the instruction and the guiding side of it, as far as both making money and where I put all my energy. Competitions were more of a side show.
And when you came to Morro Bay, you saw stand-up paddling as...
I hadn't tried it yet, really. I was doing more surfing and stuff, but then I saw the stand-up and it just seemed like a real natural fit. I could surf and I could still paddle, because I missed the paddling, definitely. Just the actual physical part of paddling. It's fun.
Did you, when you first got on a stand-up, what was it like for you?
Well, humbling a little bit. Well, in flat water it wasn't so humbling, but in the surf it was very humbling. I knew what to do with the paddle, but it was not easy to stand up and do all of that stuff I knew at the same time. It didn't take too long though. It took a couple of days out in flat water, getting the hang of it and practicing, being all right with falling in and getting back on the board, and then it all came together pretty quickly. It's really easy to learn.
That's what I had to go through. As some of you know, I have a strong background in windsurfing, so I thought, oh, this would be real easy. And Matt got me a paddleboard, and I went out in the surf, and I proceeded to get humbled and beaten up, and thought, boy, this is not the same thing at all.
Right.
And then I came into the harbor, which is, you can see, an ideal location, and a couple things happened. One is, oh, okay, I could focus on some of the things you told me I needed to do. And also, the surprise was, I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed flat water, which I didn't think I would. And so it was a great location to combine the two. Good. Well, you know, one of the things that we've got is your paddle technique and skill and background is huge, and I wanted to interview you as a resource for some of our intermediate and advanced paddlers that could get some tips from you. And some of the things that you see are more difficult for people to pick up than
just holding the paddle the right way.
Right. Yeah. Could you maybe go through just a little bit of that? Some of the things that you've seen that are...
I would say that the most common mistake I still see among more accomplished paddlers are two. There's two that are pretty equal. One is simply taking too long of a paddle stroke. Trying for brute strength over technique, that's one of the symptoms of that. And then the other one is forgetting that the paddle can spin in your hand as well. And it's not just paddling in one direction, it's applying force in the opposite direction you want to go, actually. And so between that, I guess an example of the second one is if somebody wants to turn, they will simply take a wider forward stroke instead of literally turning the paddle the other way and doing what's a proper sweep stroke.
Right.
So those are the two things I see the most common among people that are otherwise relatively accomplished paddle players.
You said a lot there.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that in a little bit more detail in terms of, I guess where I'd like to go is how people will lose their orientation to the paddle.
It's not that they lose orientation. I think that they get locked into a single orientation, which is the paddle. If you're paddling this way, the paddle is like this.
Right.
But it can go like this. And I've been telling people a lot to think about it like the palm of their hand.
Right.
If they think about that paddle like the palm of their hand and think that they're swimming, then that's going to work really well for them.
We have a rare cloudy day in Morro Bay here, so.
It's such a beautiful weather.
Okay, so Matt said a lot on paddle technique. Let's pick that up a little bit more.
I think that one of the things that people need to remember in all paddling and every stroke you do is that you're putting the paddle in the water and pulling yourself past it or pushing off of it, but you're not pulling the paddle through the water. And that's a good place to start from. And so if I want to, for instance, turn my board and pretend I'm standing on the board here, if I was paddling straight, it would just look like this. But now if I want to turn to my left, I don't plant my paddle like that. I plant it like that, and I push out, and I do a good sweep stroke. That angles the blade here. If this is where my power comes off of, the face of the blade, the power face of the blade, the direction I want to go, that should be aimed 180 degrees opposite. If I want to turn left, it's aimed that way. If I want to turn right, it's aimed to the left. And it's just like your palm of your hand if you're swimming. And everybody who swim can do this, and they know, you don't have to think about it. If you're swimming and you want to turn, you're going to do that. And that's exactly what we do with our paddle. We do that. That's the beginning of our sweep stroke, which is the most important part in our paddle boards. Compared to kayaks where we don't have a fin in the back, everything happens in the front half of the stroke up there.
Can you talk about advantages of rear stroke versus front strokes?
A rear stroke has, if you want to slow down, a back stroke has an advantage. It'll help you slow down. Mm-hmm. Other than that, most of the time in dynamic paddling situations, we don't want to get rid of our speed. We may want to manage our speed. Everything you do with the rear stroke on one side, you can do with a forward stroke on the other side. So instead of taking a back sweep on my left, or right in that case, I could take a front sweep on my left. Same thing. So as far as advantages versus disadvantages, the only advantage of the backstroke is in slowing down if you want to slow down.
But you're going to lose momentum.
You're going to lose momentum. So there's I don't know, there's an advantage to a backstroke. It's a powerful stroke. It can turn you really fast, but with a good, proper technique, the forward stroke can turn you just as fast, and you're building momentum. Even if you want to catch a wave and you're looking at it, you're better off taking 2 forward strokes and completing the turn, charging into that wave rather than spinning and then having to build speed. So that's how that works. So the backstroke is generally to be avoided.
Good. You know, on that line, you said your first common error that you see people doing is taking too long a strokes.
Too long of paddle strokes.
Can you maybe speak to momentum a little bit, because that seems to tie in?
Yeah, it does. It's actually the problem, the hidden problem, if you will, the deeper physics problem in a long paddle stroke is that you slow down so much by the time you get in the recovery stroke. By taking your paddle stroke longer, you slow down a lot by the time you can get back up. Shorter, quicker strokes have a more even maintenance of your speed with less effort. They also lift. That forward stroke is providing, what's not providing forward propulsion is providing lift, which reduces drag. By the time you pass your feet, any extra stroke, because of the angle of the paddle in the water, not everything is going into forward propulsion. Once you get too far back, what's not going into forward propulsion is now smashing you down into the water more, increasing drag, which is another reason to avoid taking too long a stroke. People say pull it out by your feet. I actually like even sooner. It should really, the angle of the blade is what's related to this forward stroke. It gives you a longer forward stroke, so I can get a little bit in further, but mostly so I can come further back before that angle has achieved a past vertical. That's where it's smashing me down into the water. So by the time your blade is vertical in the water is when you should get back up. When your blade hits the vertical point in the water, you should do your recovery. And as you can see on my stroke, that's happening, modeling here, a good foot in front of my toes. And I find that's true when I'm on a board and I'm paddling. It's really about a foot in front of my toes that I should be doing my recovery stroke and getting it back up. Beyond that, it's a point of diminishing returns, paddle-wise.
Can you talk about your release then when you're pulling it up?
The release is really important. It's really hard together. The idea behind the release is you should not, and the recovery is that you should not have to lift that paddle blade out of the water any further than necessary to get it up. You want minimal motion necessary. It's efficiency. There's a couple little tips that you can do. One is taking your top hand, the thumb, it should point forward. When you're paddling back, it's pointed to my right here. To get it to recover forward, I point it forward, and that's a natural direction that the paddle wants to spin and to slice through the water. If you also are right at this point, as you give it a little nudge, if you just push on your paddle with this lower hand, it'll almost do it all by itself. Right here. It does it almost all by itself. It really wants to do it. It helps pop it out of the water. So that 90-degree rotation is key to the recovery. It helps slice through the water and slice through wind if you have a headwind as well. Beyond that, as far as getting it up, it really shouldn't come up very much at all. And if you notice my upper hand here, hardly is moving. It's doing this tiny circle in front of my forehead. You want to protect your shoulders. First of all, keep your upper hand from forehead or lower. And if your head has to come up for your paddle recovery, your paddle's too long. So cut a couple inches off of it. Keep your hand at forehead height. A lot more power and a lot less injury.
Now I noticed with that stroke you're having your top arm elbow kind of locked. Are you doing much where you're cocking your arm?
Resistance. It's more of an isometric resistance.
Okay.
If you're doing this, look how much more everything's moving. But I'm not doing anything more when we're really doing that. Here I'm doing just as much. I'm engaging my core more, and you do definitely resist. When I go to pull back, it's a resistance here, not as much of a push because you're already out. It's more of a resistance.
So
that's how I tend to
traditional concept of pushing and pulling.
It's great for somebody's first time on a paddleboard or in a kayak. But it's not really the way we paddle. Okay. It is not because the main problem with it, especially in sitting paddling sports, is it encourages no rotation and no torso engagement. It just encourages this. And if you notice, my shoulders are not moving, and you will see a lot of people like this, but my shoulders are not moving back and forth.
Right. And
that's where you'll see the rotation. If people are really paddling, you look at their shoulders, my shoulders almost in line with my boat, and it comes back to square. And on the other side, it would be the same way if I didn't have ribs to worry about.
Matt broke ribs, not paddleboarding, but skateboarding. So
I did have a land stick, a land paddle.
You know, can you also speak to that then? Because Matt has just finished this spring doing a distance paddle from Carmel down to Morro Bay, which is what 100.
Yeah.
Or,
we did. I paddled 4 days of 20 to 25 mile days each.
Okay, now if you were paddling the incorrect way,
it would have a big. You would feel very sore at the end of the day. I mean, we were anyway. Personally, I came way off the couch for it. I think I went out and did 1 5-mile paddle.
Oh no!
In the few months beforehand.
Yeah.
But because I have this long history and I have good technique, I was able to step up and do this and get through it, and it wasn't too bad. At the end of 6 hours of paddling, and you have another head, to get around, and there's a little bit of headwind, knowing that you can paddle on autopilot with the minimal amount of effort required is a good feeling to have.
Yeah, and I think that's a key thing. This minimal effort.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of precision.
With the least.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of precision. Yeah. Paddling is all about doing the most you can with the least involved. It's a lazy man sport. Once you get there.
Everything is a lazy man sport once you reach that level of performance.
So, ankle control, angle of the blade, and the blade orientation, BO, I've called it before. Depending on where you want to go, what you want to do, very subtle angle control, constant control of this angle. that is key to busting into the expert realm, and then solid connection to your torso with the paddle is key to busting into the intermediate realm, tapping into the power you get in your body.
Are you feeling that from your toes all the way up?
Sometimes, sure. It's especially paddleboarding. Kayaking, it was a lot harder. You had to really think about engaging your lower body and work really hard at it to know you were doing it even. Paddleboarding, it's not. I'll paddle for a mile feeling my feet tug the board every stroke, and then I'll change it up a little bit. I'll focus on something else. There's a lot of flexibility within these paddle strokes that you can think about driving forward to the hip on the hip and knee on the recovery each time. So yeah, sometimes I do. And I think about pushing with my toes, pushing the board along, and I really feel that engages the core a lot more when I do it consciously.
How about foot position? Are you changing your foot position
I
much?
do step around on the board a lot. It helps me, first of all, stay on the board for a long time. We never just stand in one place like this on ground. Our feet would get sore then as well, and our ankles would probably get tired. So little steps back and forth I do all the time. I usually will have one foot slightly in front of the other and a fairly narrow stance. You'll see a lot of folks with a really wide stance, but anybody who's been on a small boat knows you don't step to the edge, you step to the middle. And you will find your power in your stroke actually increases with a narrower stance. If you come down to a 6 to 7, maybe 8-inch wide stance tops, you'll have better power as well, because you're really you're able to lock in and pull against things a little more. I haven't really figured that one out yet, but I definitely feel the difference. You have more rotation, I think, with a slightly narrower stance, and that might be part of it.
Okay.
But you get a lot more power.
Talk about your knees and how your legs.
Yeah, just comfortably.
Loose.
Yeah. I mean, for flat water paddling,
Yeah.
in the surf, it's totally different. There's times where you really are pushing and weighting different parts of the board. So, but it's just pretty much like how I'm standing right now, like you could stand your whole life. You know, that's why I like to tell people that want lessons. I go out and spend a few days on the board, a few sessions on the board, because you already know how to stand. You just have to figure out how to stand on that. After that, we can talk about footwork and paddle strokes.
Good.
But yeah, other than not having too wide a stance, I don't think it's a natural stance that you would have if you're hanging out on the corner waiting for a bus, or at a